Then, just for fun, I loaded a topo quad, and because I wanted to test the raster function that he talks about in the book. You'll see where he does give an example. He doesn't go into a lot of detail of how to do it, but he shows that you can basically take an image file and use that as a KML data source as well. Now, what you'll run into, though, if you're not careful, again, is that limitations. I don't remember the size, but it's not very large. Doesn't take much to exceed the limitations. So if you try to take one of your typical high-resolution aerial photos, for example, you're going to find that it won't work because it exceeds that limitation. But then again, another important thing to remember here is that part of the whole reason we're doing a lot of this using Google Maps is because Google already has they already have your aerial imagery and terrain maps and things like that built into Google, and that's part of the reason for using this whole process. Really, is because we can take advantage of the base data that Google already has available, and it's automatically pulled into their API. So that saves us all that effort on the raster data. So my point is that in terms of aerial imagery and things like that, unless you have something special that you want to load, then you're not going to be using that function a lot anyway. So you're not going to use the raster side of things very often. So that limitation wouldn't be an issue in that case. But for fun, I wanted to see how it would look I used a topo map, just a basic DRG file that I got from the Tennessee Spatial Data Server. And I pulled that in just to test it and see what would happen. Now, I'm going to turn that off for now, and because I first want to focus on this federal lands layer. So what I did to export that, if you don't know how, is you can turn on your toolbox in ArcGIS, and they've got both an import from KML file and an export to a KML file. Now again, it's a little misleading on the export because it doesn't really export a KML, it exports a KMZ. And I'll bring that up again here in a minute. Unlike Google Earth, which will let you export either a KML or a KMZ, either one. And again, the only difference with a KMZ is that it's a little bit smaller because it's a zipped up version of the KML file. And that GGOXML object has the capabilities, it looks like, of handling either one. So if you're trying to save a little bit of space, then that's where the KMZ would come in handy. But when you get your toolbox open up here in ArcMap, you can go to your conversion tools, and they've got here a to KML option. Okay, you can see they also have the from KML. But in this case, let's just say we want to export this federal lands layer out to the KML file. So you just go layer to KML. All my windows are opening in the other side here, so let me bring them over. And then you just pick the file you want to export, which in this case, again, is the one I created out of the larger data set, the federal lands just for Tennessee. And then you give it a name. And in this case, this is where you can see it's only going to use KMZ for the type. If you try to change that, there are no other types listed there. So, and what I did, I already created it, but I put it in my Chapter 3 folder just so I would have it in the same location as the other files I was working with. And I just exported it already as this Tennessee Federal Lands KMZ, which since I've already done it, I won't save it here, but this is where you would save it, of course. And but before you click save, what you want to do is you want to want the image output properties. Let me make sure I've got the setting. Okay, yeah. In this case, you can just go with the default on that layer. You don't have to set any of these settings. Now, when you're doing a raster file, then down here, this last one, this output image properties, is going to come into play a little bit here on the resolution. But we'll ignore that for now, just accept the defaults. And you can save and get basically a KML file of federal lands for Tennessee of your own. And let me change my windows here where you can see the file listing. Now I've changed my file listing a little bit here so I wouldn't have to recreate everything. I basically added, so you're seeing a lot of extra files in here that I was playing around with. But one of those files in here is the Tennessee Federal Lands file. that we just created. Okay, and you can see the size of that file is it's not very big, only 214 kilobytes. Now that file, we could interestingly, we could double click on that file, and because Google Earth is associated with a KMZ and a KML file type, Google Earth would open and show that file on our desktop. Just to show you that, I'll execute it, and it's probably going to open in my other window. I'll probably have to move it over here, so give me just a minute. And it is opening, and it's in the other window, so you can't see how it's zooming in on it. If I can get it to move over before it zooms, I'll do so, but don't know if it's going to move or not. Looks like it's not right now. It's got to finish loading before it will let me move my window. But it zooms to the extent of that file. And you'll see that here in a minute when it does let me move it. It's loading the imagery that Google has in the background right now, so it's taking it a minute here to load. Okay, there it loaded, and I was able to move it over finally. But you can see how it automatically zoomed to the extent of that window. But here, this is our own KML file that's added with all the other default features I have selected to turn on in Google Earth. But I just wanted to show how it does load that file. It's put it in its temporary places down here at the bottom. And if I were in Google Earth and didn't have ArcGIS and I wanted to create a KML file from Google Earth, that's why I loaded it here. I wanted to show you. You can basically select the file and right click on it and then go to Save Places As, and that will pop up a little dialog that lets you pick the name and the location and the type. And you can see by default it's going to export it as a KMZ file. It's keeping the same name, but you can change it in Google Earth. Unlike ArcGIS, I can make that a KML file instead of KMZ, and I can export that file, which I'm going to go ahead and do just for fun here, because I wanted to show you something that you might want to just try on your own. And now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and close Google Earth. Tell it to discard my places. And you can see now I have a KML file. And just to compare the sizes, you can see it is about 5 times as large as the KMZ file. So when you're dealing with large files, you can see the advantage of having a KMZ file. But one of the nice advantages of the KML files is that you can actually open a KML file in your editor, and you can kind of learn a little bit about what's in a KML file. Again, if I try to load the KMZ file, just to show you, here's what you'll get. It'll be just mainly garbage. You can't understand what it is. But I can load the KML file, and it loads because it's basically an ASCII file. So it loads just fine. And if I maximize that window, you can look through this and you can learn a little bit about the KML file structure on your own by browsing through this. Now there's lots of stuff in here. And one of the things it did for me is it gave me an appreciation of just how much work is going on behind the scenes in these programs that create these relatively small files, and just how much stuff is in there. Okay, and so in this example, there's enough data in that layer file that has created a large file. And if you wanted to do what I'm doing now, a good thing to do would probably be just create one feature and export that, and you could learn a little bit more about it. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how this works, what's in it, but I wanted to just show you, because I know some of you are like me, you're probably curious a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. And you can actually open a KML file and you can learn a little bit about the file structure. And you'll see things in here that begin to make sense now that you've worked with the coding a little bit. And you'll see things like style for the labels. You'll see colors that are being used, and these are just ASCII binary numbers, by the way, which again is more than we want to get into now, but you can assign colors and you can actually look these numbers up and change them to different colors and things like that. But you can actually edit a KML file just a little bit, and there might be a time where you needed to do that. It's not going to happen to us right away. We're not going to do it in these examples, but again, I just wanted to make you aware of the fact that you can do some of these things, and you can learn a little bit more about the file types by doing that. which is handy, especially for the people that are curious. So I'm going to back out of that now. And what I want to do is I want to point out how you can take your website that you created. Let me change my window size here. And I'm going to go back into my website, which is not loaded here in memory, so give me just a second here to load it. Okay, I've got my page here, and I'm going to go into the new file cabinet that I created for data files. And I'm going to add that KML file that we created, and I want to get the KMZ in this case. Either one would work, but again, the KMZ is smaller. I'm just going to delete that KML because I mainly wanted to just show you again how you can actually create a KML, even if you've created the KMZ with ArcGIS and you want it in KML for some reason. You can do that by exporting it back out of Google Earth. And you can also load files exported from Google Earth into ArcMap as well. I've noticed sometimes the functionality changes a little bit when you do that, but you can do it. For some reason my file deletes not wanting to work. I've got so many windows open, I think my computer's slowing down. There we go. Okay, I'm going to add the file. And I can just, this is just using functionality built into the Google Sites, which there's some pros and cons that we'll see real quickly here with the Google Sites. But one of the advantages is it does a lot of stuff for you. If you're getting serious about doing some web pages and doing some of this programming on your own, you're going to want to learn a little bit more than what we're talking about in the book here. And you're going to probably want your own website that's not a Google site, but one of your own. And I'll show you here in a little bit some examples of why you might want that. But one of the nice things with Google, again, is it does a lot of stuff for you. If you were doing it on your own site, a lot of times you'll have to use what they call an FTP program. That is File Transfer Protocol. It's basically what you would use to move files back and forth from your desktop up to your website on the internet and things like that. Whereas the Google Sites has a lot of that functionality built into it. So we can just click Add a File, and it opens up essentially what's like an FTP file. It's a file upload program that Google has created. And it lets us browse on our computer to the folder we want and then pick the data files we want to upload. And it works pretty quickly as well. So it's on my folder by default because I've already used that before. So I just go to the file I want to upload, select it, click Open, and it runs for a minute, tells me it's uploading, and in just a minute it's uploaded. And it changes my view a little bit here to show me the file. I'll maximize that window so it all shows up in one line. And what I've done basically is created a KMZ file in ArcMap that I customized out of some other data I had, and it's polygons. And then I uploaded that to my website into my file cabinet. So now I have data that exists on the internet on a source that I've created. And that's what I'm wanting you to do for your practice, is to create your own type of a KMZ file or KML file, whichever, and upload it to your file cabinet. And then what we can do is consume that in our own code. So what we're going to do now that we've got a data file up there to work with is we're going to go back into our files from the chapter. So give me just a minute to change my view a little bit here. Okay, so it's not to confuse you, I've rearranged my files a little bit because I had worked with these earlier and created my own versions of the JavaScript files and everything, and I kept some of the same names, so I didn't want to create examples that I had changed and confuse you. So I'm going to redrag, actually all I need is the last JavaScript file, the 03 this time, and I'm going to get the CSS file. So these are the three files that I want to work with, okay? One is the HTML file that we've been using, the same CSS file, so we don't have to change any names there. And then we're going to use the 0303 JavaScript file. So I need to make sure, yes, I do have that set here from before. So I've got all my file names set up properly here in my links in the HTML. Now let's go into our JavaScript and take a look at what he was doing in there. And again, he was mainly pulling from a source that that was up in British Columbia where he had set up for an office location, and then he pulled in again that KML file that had the transit system around that. Now what we're going to do, and this is part of the whole reason for using this book, it really is because we're going to take his code and tweak it a little bit. So we want to understand what his code is doing, which is what reading through the chapter will do for you. Again, you may have to do this a couple times to let it all sink in. And then, and this is where you really learn, I think, is by going in and playing with the code a little bit. But remember, you have to be very meticulous about this because, again, you have 3 different file types you're working with, and you got to make sure they all, when you change something in one, you got to make sure that you've walked it through any of the other steps. In most cases, you only have to change it in one location. But again, you want to start out by making sure your HTML file is referencing the location and name of the files that you're wanting to use in your CSS file and your JavaScript. We're not modifying the CSS file yet, so that's always good. JavaScript is the one we're changing, but all we're going to change is the data source in here, so it's not going to affect our HTML file. So what I want to do instead down here is I'm just for fun, I'm just going to keep the same variables he's started with here. Now I can add more, and we may get into that a little bit later. But just as a starting point, I'm not going to modify too much, but I do want to change enough to give you a feel for it here. So let's first change our coordinates. Okay, instead of coming out in British Columbia, we want to come up in, let's just say, Tennessee, in the middle of Tennessee, because that will get us around the area that we used for our federal lands file that we exported. So we need to know a coordinate for somewhere in the location roughly of the middle of Tennessee. So one way of getting that, one thing you could do is open ArcGIS and kind of get an approximate latitude and longitude that way. Or you can go just to Google Maps and you could do it that way. You could also use Google Earth and get it that way. So just for fun, I'm already in Google Maps, so I'm going to go into my places. It makes me load my places though first, and in this case, it's probably not the best way to do this, but I'm just going to create a new map so I can get the little marker icon up here and put that roughly in Middle Tennessee, and I right-clicked and clicked on what's here. And when I did that, my marker changed to the little green arrow. And if I let my mouse hover over that, it gives me some coordinates. Okay. Again, this may not have been the best way to do this, but I already had it started, so I wanted to follow through with it. So what you can do then is just jot down on a piece of paper, if you don't have 2 windows to work with, just jot down the early parts of the coordinates. You don't have to get all of that long number, but get at least enough details so that you can get 3 decimal places, say. So I'm going to write down 36.164 and minus 85, and again that minus is important, 985. Okay, that gives us some coordinates, so we've got roughly in the middle of Tennessee with that. And I'll close that window and go back up here. And then in our code, okay, in the JavaScript file, let's change those coordinates from what they have there to these new ones that we got. So I'm just going to go 36 and I had 164 and negative 85.985. Okay, and so this gets us pretty close to the middle of Tennessee. And I'm not sure which zoom ratio to use. We'll have to experiment with that a little bit. But I know it's not going to be 15 because that's going to just show me a real close area. And I don't want to get too small with the number. The smaller the number, remember, the more area it's going to show. So for starters, just to start off with, let's just use 6. And we'll see how this looks in a minute and decide from there if that's important. And in fact, you can test that now just by changing those two things. Even though it's still trying to pull that data from that file that doesn't exist anymore, I can save that file just to see if I've got my zoom where I want it, and I can drag my HTML file in and drop it in my browser, and it should zoom into Tennessee for me and show me about the area that I might be located in. And you can see how it looks. Probably want to zoom in a little bit more than that. So what I'll do is go back in my code, and this is a handy thing about having all 3 of them kind of on the same window, these 3 different views, is I can basically just change that 6 now to, let's just change it to 4 and save it, and I can then just refresh my window and see if it zooms in to closer. I'm actually going the opposite direction of what I wanted, so instead of 4, let's go 8, and we'll save that and zoom in. And that's a little better, I think, there. If I maximize my browser window, it may be a little too much. It might be better to go 1 step down from that, and that will get us pretty close. So let's do that. And notice that it's popping up the info window, the same info window with the detail he had put in it earlier. Let me change that 8 to a 7 and save it. We'll refresh, and that should be pretty close to what we want. Yeah, much better. So that gets us to where we can see all of the state, and we can easily drag our window a little bit and get into what we want. But we could tweak our coordinates and get a little better, but you see the point there, and you can do that now on your own. Now, the info window, again, we can customize that now by just going into the code, and he's got our office. I'm just going to say Mark's office. And notice when it didn't like if I put an apostrophe there, it changed the code a little bit. So I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to leave that without that. The apostrophes actually alters the code, because you see we've got apostrophes surrounding this code. So we would have to offset that some way. And so I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm just going to do it without the apostrophe, so I don't actually alter the code in a way that would make it not work. Because I'm mainly just wanting to make a point here that you can tweak it by tweaking the code he has. So you notice the H3 around it, that's what's giving it the bold look, okay, in there. And you could play around with that. If you made it H2, it'd be even larger, and you can experiment with that a little bit. For now, I'm going to leave that part the same. And for the address, I'm just going to use my work address. Instead of Vancouver, British Columbia, I'm going to say Knoxville, Tennessee, and just save that. And just for fun, you can refresh it and see how it looks. And you can see I've got now my information in here. Okay, so and if we did not want it to pop up automatically on this event trigger, he's got click. I can't remember if we just set that to blank. I think takes care of making it not open automatically. Let me try that. No, it's opening automatically. I can't remember now if you say no or off. He's probably got it in the chapter, and I can't remember right now. I didn't save it. Okay, I said no, and it looks like that took care of it. It's not popping up automatically. Yeah, and then I can do it. So you can say, and that's basically saying, do I want to trigger the marker? How am I triggering it? And I'm just saying no, not doing anything. But we could type in click, and there's probably some other functions we could type in there to do other things as well. So I'll set it back like it was, back to click. But that's how I could turn that off. And for the source, now let's pull in the source for the data to wrap this up. We'll pull in the source that we created from the KML file with the federal lands in Tennessee. And so we actually have a path that we can use to that. And the easiest way for you to get that path is to go back into your website and look at pull up where that file is located, and you can pull it out of the top of the browser window. So if I go into the data files path here, which is where that file is located, okay, then what I can do is copy the code at the top of this window, and that's going to get me part of the way from my path. I can copy that, and I'm going to paste that in here. Now be careful you keep the quote around the outside of this name, and it might be easier till you get used to this kind of copy and paste to just delete that information except for the quotes. But I think I've got it highlighted there. Then I'm going to paste, and this way it just pastes over top of it if I do it that way. And what it's done, you see I've got a path down to my data files folder, but it doesn't have the file name in it yet. So I need to finish this. And what I want to do now is I'm going to go to the end of the stuff I pasted. I'm going to put a / there, and then I'm going to type the name of the file, which is Tennessee _ FEDLANDS KMC. So I've got my own Tennessee Federal Lands file now, and my own path to my website there created. And let's save that, and let's go back and re-execute our HTML and see how it looks. And you see after a minute there it loads that information. Okay. It did my automatic pop-up. I've now customized that with my information, and you'll see that there's other files open on top of our Google map here. And I can zoom into them a little bit just to, sometimes it helps when the info window opens. But if I click on the Smokies, for example, notice my marker here changes to a little finger there. So I know there's something clickable. And I click on that, and what it does is it pops up the information that I had in my attribute table for that layer. Okay, and this is what's really neat to me, is that you can build something in ArcMap, create your data table like you want it, put the information in there, and you can access it through here. Because when it creates the KMZ file, it carries over all of those attribute data, all of the attribute data with it. And it automatically organizes it for you in a pretty neat little pop-up. It automatically put all of these different lines in there to separate it. The data came straight out of our file, but and this is something ArcGIS did. ArcGIS, when it executed the KMZ file, the code in there built this little info window, the details in terms of the highlighting and so forth, for me automatically. Now that's why I showed you how you could actually look at a KML file, because if you learn enough about KML files, you could actually tweak this yourself. But I like the default pretty good that's coming out of ArcGIS. It's much better than it used to be as well. It used to be not nearly this nice. And this data file is available on some of our data download sites. If we don't have it in our class, I'll have it up there soon if you want to just play with this example. But something I added to it, and rather than go back and show you, I think you could do this on your own. I'll show you the results here from it. But I added a field to my table, and I just called it image link. And what I did, I set it to text for the type, and I made it about 85 characters wide. And I went through then, and I went to a couple of Flickr sites and got a couple images, like one of the Smokies. And I got the link to that image, and I put it in my attribute table in ArcMap. And that's what gave me this link here. And you'll see that ArcMap detected that it was a web link, and so it made it clickable. Okay? So, and this is what I wanted to show you, is that these pop-ups, you can not only just put data in there and change the font and so forth, and the size, making it bold and so forth, the header size, but you can actually have a link inside your pop-up that if you click on it will take you to that source. So I'll click on this link, and notice too that it opens up in a new window, which is nice because our other window is still back there in the background. We haven't changed anything. And in this case, I got the page that the photo was on. But so it doesn't have to be just a photo. It can be an actual website. And so this took me to that source that I had pulled from of a picture I found on Flickr in the Smokies. So pretty neat stuff. I can close that, and I'm back to my window where I started with. And I did that for fun just with a couple places. I think I did the Big South Fork as well. And I added a link to, I don't think it's even in the Big South Fork, but it's another picture in the Smokies. But just wanted to show you that it's pretty neat that you can begin to make your mashups a lot more powerful now by adding not only your own customized information, but you can also go out and get links and so forth and set that up to where you can take the user from one location to another location. So we can begin to put information instead of just having the pop-up for our office location. We can put clickable, linkable information in that pop-up as well. And we'll see this a little bit more in some other neat things we can do in chapter 4 and 5. But wanted to show you that now just to introduce you to that. So hopefully now you'll feel a little better about this. Play with this on your own and try to experiment and see if you can't create your own KMZ file, load it up to your website, and try pulling it in your code like I did here. And change your coordinates a little bit, tweak the location, tweak the zoom level, tweak your data source. Keep it simple right now, just do one data source. And then after you've done that with a couple things, if you want to get fancy with it a little bit and do even more, realize that you can also add more variables to this. And I did so in another listing of my own. And I'm not going to explain all of it right now because I don't want to confuse you. I want you to play with it first. But realize that you can add another variable, and instead of just name it GOXML1. And if you want to add 2 more, GOXML2. And then you can come down here in the code, and where you add this GOXML file, you can copy that code, paste it, and change your variable names a little bit, and you can add more GOXML layers here. And just make sure you add both this line, okay, and tweak it, and you call it GOXML1. And then here you want to copy this and paste it again as well. And in there you would want to add a GOXML1. So you can end up with something that looks like, just as an example, I'm going to pull in that one I've already done. And this one has probably got a little more than what we want in it, but I was playing with it and I got a little carried away. But you can see where I went through and added 3 or 4 more GOXML layers. And then I went through and I was experimenting with different KML links that I had set up on my page and going to different locations, testing some other sites. And one of the things you can do with your code is if you put 2 slashes, forward slashes in front of that line of code, it comments it out. So you can add what we call comments to your code. And once you've got these in there, you can change them real easily. I could take those 2 slashes out and notice by using Notepad++, the color of my line changes. It lets me know what's in green is commented out. And I know when I execute the code, it's going to ignore anything that's in green. And the way you can do that, again, is just put 2 forward slashes in front of that line. And this works great when you've got just a single line of code like that. So again, I don't want to confuse you too much right now because I want you to practice the stuff we went over a minute ago. But I know some of you are a little more advanced on it already, and some of you, once you've done that, will want to play a little bit more. So I wanted to just introduce you here to the fact that if you're very careful about your naming and stuff, you can go in and you can add multiple layers. And I added a few things that I found, and just again, I added that topo map that I mentioned earlier. And that I got that to work, and I put it on my site. And the only thing I found was that it was pretty fuzzy on the look, come out pretty fuzzy. And I don't know if it will open since I've got it in a different folder here. But just for fun, let me just drag it over here and see if it will open. If so, I can show you what I was talking about. Yeah, it looks like it is opening. So let me maximize this a little bit so you can see what I did. And through some of the changes that I did, I was able to add a radar map with the weather data, and I'll show you here in just a second where you can get that. And let me zoom in so I can show you the topo map, which is what I was mentioning there a minute ago. And let me recenter my window. Looks like we got some storms on the way. And you can see it popping up there, the DRG in the Crossville area. Now in this case, this one's pretty sharp because I used another tool to export with that you're not going to have. I was testing it a little bit. The first time I exported it with ArcGIS, I got a really poor resolution DRG, and it was nowhere near this nice even. But this is, you can see how it did add the DRG, and it still has kept my point there. And my office name is not in there because I didn't change that line. Now let me go back before I confuse you too much here. And what I did in ArcGIS, I have another program that's called XTools Pro, and it also exports to KML, but it looks like it exports a little differently. It does it in different passes. It keeps the resolution, the end result is it keeps the resolution a little bit better, it looks like. But back in your settings that I showed you earlier, you could tweak those settings for the resolution and probably get it to be a little bit sharper through the ArcGIS. And I was experimenting with that and having just limited luck, and I tried the XTools Pro, and it looked a lot better, so I went with that. So again, I don't want to confuse you too much there, but I want to give you enough room that you can hopefully take that information, play with it a little bit on your own, and try some things. On the weather, I wanted to show you this. I found a source for KML data that I thought was pretty neat. And if you go to, let me bounce out of that. Let me go over here just to their initial page. If you go to the National Weather Service site, NOAA.gov, I went to NOAA.com, but it switched it automatically for me. Their homepage has a lot of stuff in it, but you can get to a weather forecast for your city. So what I did is I went to Crossville. To type. And it takes you to a neat weather page that they have. And one of the nice advantages of that I found is they've got a little button here for KML, and I can click on this button, and it will take me to automatically gives me a KML digital forecast file for the Crossville area. Okay, and what it does is it's basically the same thing that you see right here with this green box. If I click on that box, it will give me, I think anyway, it looks like it's not opening, but what it gives you is the same information they have right here on this page. It's basically a textual based forecast for the next week and a half or so. And that's what you'll get if you take that KML file and save it to your computer. And notice it is in KML format. And that's the other reason I wanted to show you this example, is that you can open that file. It's not as large as the one we looked at earlier. This one's much smaller, and you can learn a little bit about it. Okay, and now this is just optional. You don't have to do this, but if you do that, open it up and look at it, and then play with it a little bit. And what I was doing, just to show you some of the results, and they're not finished, but at least it gives you an idea of where I was going, is changing the icons and things like that to get my own icons. So I'll show you that result in a minute, but I also wanted to show you that you can go to another site they have, also same National Weather Service, but they have there was a link, and I don't remember where I found the link. If I found it on this page here, there was somewhere I found a KML Files link. Anyway, if you don't see it, just search for KML Files in National Weather Service, or better yet, just type down the address here. I'll switch over to the page, and this address right here at the top, you can type that down and you'll have it. And it takes you to a special page they've set up where you can download KML and KMZ files for all kinds of different weather forecast information. And one of them I wanted was the radar map. So I had the textual based link, and then I had this radar map, and I think this area right here is where I pulled it from, this single image by radar. And I've submitted this, and it gave me a download link, and I was able to pull the KML file. And what's neat is it's not a fixed file. It takes you to the latest information. So all you have to do is take that file you get, load it up to your site, and then you can always have the current weather radar on your map. You don't have to worry about it updating it manually anymore then, because their KML file is set up in a way that it always gets the latest radar image. And so you can always have the latest radar image on your map. And the reason you want to upload these KML files, by the way, to your website, and I didn't point this out earlier, but he mentions it in the book, is that GGOXML routine only executes files that are located on an internet site. So you have to have a source on the internet to pull from when you execute that. So that's why you have to get these KML files from your desktop up to your website. But once you download this stuff from the Weather Service, you can copy it up into your file cabinet and reference the link in there at the bottom of the JavaScript file, and you can actually load your own radar image on top of your map as well. And here's something like what you would get is what I had that I had pulled up there. And this shows some of the extra stuff I was playing with as well. If you remember, I had like 4 different layers on there. Let me zoom back out a little bit. Actually, let me just refresh it. And that way it will zoom out to the state. And you can see here's the radar image that loaded. And over here to the right is it also loads a little legend for you so you can see what the codes are. Same thing you would get on the Weather Service site. And so I've got here like 4 layers of information. I've got my my federal lands layer information that I loaded that's clickable, that has the information from my attribute table. It has the image link that I created where I can open up a link to another site or an image. It also had the initial marker point that the author is using, and I did not customize it, which is something you'd want to do. I had changed my coordinates level again. I changed my zoom ratio to get what I wanted. And then it also added that radar image for the Nashville area. Okay. And then when I was telling you you could edit the code in the KML, I was able to figure out that it was loading 2 different icons. And through playing with it a little bit, I was able to change one of those icons to my own. And what I did is I took just a GIF file from the place where I work and use that just to again to play around with it a little bit. And I'm still tweaking it to try to figure out how to get this other image off. It keeps wanting to pop up, and I can't. It's in one or the other of the 2 weather layers that I had, because there's also loaded still that digital forecast, the one I showed you initially. That's just the textual based. Problem is it's hidden under that DRG that I loaded. So if the DRG wasn't there, I could show you. There's a little box. It's pink in this case. It was green on their site, but you could click on that box and it pops up a bubble that shows you the forecast for the week, which is pretty neat. So, and I think that's where this other NOAA icon is coming from. But what I was trying to do again was just customize it to make it something more of my own. And this is what you can do to start with to play with the code. And I really think that it's kind of hard to describe all this stuff. But if you get in there and start playing with it a little bit, you'll learn a lot from that. And again, it's up to you how much you get into this part of it. You can if you just stick with what the author's doing in the book, you'll get at least what I wanted you to get at a minimum out of it. But if you really want to learn it and really want to make it your own, don't be shy about going in there and experimenting a little bit with it, adding some of your own data links, and just try some of this. And that's the best way to learn it. And I'll try to share with you more things that I've customized on my own. Hopefully this is enough to keep you busy for a while and not confuse you too much. Again, rewatch the video if you need to and pause it. Make sure you do what the author does in the book first, and that you're comfortable with that, and then gradually go in and change some of it to your own. And I think you'll be pretty impressed with what you can do, and probably pretty excited about it as well, because you really can begin to make your own mashups at that point, which is a pretty good feeling when you start doing that and having some success. And you can hopefully begin to see other ideas that you could apply with this, and we'll do more of this on a class project later on. So okay, I'm going to stop with that. We've been going a little over an hour and a half, and hopefully this is enough to keep you busy. Try this a little while and experiment with it and have fun with it. And we'll be back with chapter 4 soon.